and I don't know.
So welcome back. We've just sat through a really engaging and absorbing discussion by Alka Sarogi about her new book. And we now move to another all-woman panel of two women authors and Karuna Ezra Parekh, who's going to be in conversation with them. Woman front and center is what we've called this panel because both the books being discussed today have women both front and center. Sakun Singh's author, who's the author of In the Land of Lovers, and Mahek Jangda, who is the author of Sometimes Ivory, Sometimes Sand, discuss their women-centric debut novels with writer Karuna Ezra Parekh. Sakun Singh is an alumnus of Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi and Punjab University. We seem to be flooded by JNU alumni for this particular festival. Huh? We had 3 or 4 of them yesterday. Our festival director himself is a JNU alum. She is now teaching literature and cultural studies at Chandigarh, a recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship at the University of Texas at Austin. She has published her academic writings extensively, including Contribution to Cultural Studies in India by Routledge. She has served on the editorial team of prestigious journals and written articles and op-eds on literature, art, culture and aesthetics. She is currently also Associate Fellow at IIAS Shimla. Mahek Jangda's debut novel Sometimes Ivory, Sometimes Sand was long listed for the Times of India JK Paper Author Awards. That's how we pronounce it, spelt unusually, in the debut category, and has been shortlisted for the WOW Literature Festival in the English fiction category. Her poetry has been featured by the Hindu Business Line, Hyderabad Literary Festival, Unerased, Commune, Habitat Studies, and the Poetry Club, to Habitat Studios, and the Poetry Club, Mumbai. She recently graduated from the Young India Fellowship Program and is currently pursuing an MA in Liberal Studies from Ashoka University. Karuna Ezra Parekh is a poet and writer, former television anchor and model, widely known for her activism. She has written for Vogue, Tehelka, The Wire, and Lonely Planet, amongst others. Her novel, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, was published by Pan Macmillan in 2020, and her first book of poetry, Where Stories Gather, is just out, and we have the privilege of launching it a little later today as part of our Poetry Cafe. So welcome to all three of you, and Karuna, please take it away.
Hi, can you all hear me? The mics. Yeah. Firstly, hi, it's so good to be here at a Lit Fest in person. I really enjoyed both your books. I'm going to jump right into it, Mahek. And so Mahek wrote Sometimes Ivory, Sometimes Sand, and the book is placed in a imaginary but very familiar country where I'd say there's 2 women from different districts, one from the more modern district and one from a more conservative district, and their lives kind of become swapped in a certain sense, and they need to collide in order to save themselves. So I was absolutely fascinated by your plot, and as a writer I find plot one of the hardest things to do, and I thought you did it miraculously actually. So how did you come up with the story?
Okay, that's actually not a very straightforward answer, but I think I wanted to write for a while, so I was working on very different kinds of books. But I just come back home from college in 2015, finished my undergrad, and at that point of time, my family was looking for a groom for one of my cousins. And
as one does.
As one does, exactly. So while that was happening, I think I saw a lot of things happening around me, like there was a biodata prepared for the cousin, like she was asked to lose weight and like dress up a certain way, be a certain way, know how to cook certain things, like kind of being prepped to kind of go see a prospective groom. And I think that is when this kicked off. that really got to me, because I was wondering how much a woman has to change herself to fit into an ideal, and I think that kind of triggered a lot of things that I'd seen since my childhood, like how, I think even in the previous session this was discussed a bit, but like how women in, like especially back home in my mother's family, always wear ghungat, and like not ghungat but like take a head covering and all of that, and I think that is when it kicked off. Like the first chapter, that's when I wrote it, which is also about a prospective groom coming to see Jasmine, who's one of the lead characters. So that's when it started. After that, like I had a few ideas. I definitely wanted to get the story out of the home, because I wanted to get it in a public sphere, because the women that I had seen around me were more at home and their problems were inside the house, as in like the discussions were also more internal, and I wanted to see what it does to bring it out in a public sphere. So I knew that's where I wanted to take it, but everything else kind of just happened as the characters made them happen. So yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, your characters really do some remarkable things. And I'll come to that later, but actually what you said leads me very nicely into the question I had for you, Sifun. So this is In the Land of Lovers, which is a beautiful name for the book as well.
Thank you.
And this takes place mostly in Punjab, and a partitioned Punjab as well, and deals with partition and present day, well, kind of present day. And in your case, you know, the characters they're very set in their domestic spheres. You know, and despite that, you know, I found that, yeah, there's so much noise at the back. Despite that, I found that, you know, they do really remarkable things as well, and in a more quiet way. And I, you know, as a woman writing women characters myself, in the past, I kind of felt, while I was writing, I felt compelled in India to write very strong female characters, and I was wondering if it was the same for you. You know, if you, sometimes one feels one doesn't even have a choice to not write that. So how was it, the experience for you in writing these characters that are seemingly set in domesticity, but, you know, go on to do really remarkable things?
See, partly for me, the act of writing was really to record some of the very unique experiences, because I feel literature has a value because it is so grounded, you know, in a unique experience. And I felt, being from a particular generation and having been exposed to a particular family history, I mean, you say they're domesticated, but well, you know, Nanki is there all over the place. And I think it is Nanki's empathy really. She might seem very, very quiet, but she has a steelier side which stems out of her empathy. We were talking about the value of love and empathy yesterday, you know, when all seems to just buckling under pressure. We talked about dystopia yesterday, but I think it is the human qualities of empathy and love really. And in her, I see a kind of Sufi. You know, she's really stemming out of a Sufi consciousness, wherein she doesn't have to knock off the other, but she's trying to, you know, really see a ground where that understanding can be achieved. So for me, she is a very strong character, and the fact that we are looking at domestic spaces is also because it is an intergenerational saga. So while Nanki is the protagonist, and I relate with Nanki the most, I mean, I would be somebody like Nanki, even though it's not autobiographical. I think it's very surface to say that it is autobiographical, because fiction operates in all ways, all kinds of ways, and you're kind of mixing reality and imagination in ways that even you would not know how you do. So it's a you know, kind of a mix. So while there are certain characters who seem to stem and to be more in domestic spaces and operate more in domestic spaces, there is Nanki who's going out there and, you know, in her own ways challenging what is out there.
And I mean, BG also does it, you know, when you
Oh,
look at
yes.
the partition story.
Oh yes.
You know, and I think that's something very unique to womanhood, you know, that we are often placed in the domestic sphere, but you know, when you turn the heat up, you know, and there's some very brutal moments in both your books and some very scary moments. You know, the responses of your characters are of extreme strength, and I loved that. In fact, what she was saying about Nanki reminded me a bit about Jasmine, right? Jasmine's character. So the other thing that I liked about both your books is that you each have two female protagonists, right? And they're both very different from each other. So can you tell me about developing those characters a bit? You can both, yeah.
You.
Okay, so I think for me, like I think like Sukoon also just said, I think when you write fiction, a lot of reality gets kind of you know, like merged with imagination, and I think a lot of you also comes out on paper, but not necessarily through a character, but through the whole fictional landscape itself. So I think for me,
in fact, sorry to interrupt, but don't you feel when you're writing fiction that as an author you are in every character?
Exactly.
And so I find it so annoying when people are like, is this based on your life? Like, of course
That
it
is the
and of course
question.
it is.
That is the question.
yeah, you can see it in your choice of word, like
Yeah.
why you've used a certain word and why you've not, and that is
Exactly.
also you
So
in
true.
many ways.
Yeah.
So, for me, when I was developing both of them, while I was writing them, I was 20, 21. I finished it when I was 21. So I think I wanted young characters because I just wanted there to be strength in young women and young characters, because I think I was looking for that strength myself. I think Laila for me was somebody who was slightly more aspirational in a way. I mean, for myself, I was like, I want to kind of be somebody who is as resilient as Laila, and developing her was developing both of them. Actually, I wanted to bring out how people, like how women coming from very different backgrounds, like they don't have to be born in the same setting, they don't have to be born with the same kind of conditioning, and yet the pressures that they face, the kind of what society kind of throws at them can really challenge them in multiple ways. It's not you being born in a certain space, like Jasmine is from a much more conservative space where her mother is telling her that, you know, you listen to what the man has to say, while Laila is brought up in a completely opposite way. And I wanted to show how, despite being brought up in separate spaces and very different spaces, it is actually, it can be very challenging just because you're born a certain person in a certain identity. So yeah, that contrast I wanted to develop, which is why both the characters were developed like that, and they were young because and also their personalities are quite different. Laila is somebody who really cares about kind of doing large change, while Jasmine just wants to discover herself and figure out what it is.
And both are profound in their own way.
And
and you know, I think it's so important what you said, because there's this idea, and you know, we hear it all the time, that city women or educated women or women of privilege don't face those things, you know, as though patriarchy doesn't exist for us in these structures.
I think it just changes form. It is a shape
Yeah,
shifter,
exactly,
you know,
just
it's a
changes
shape
form,
shifter.
Yeah.
And where do you don't have it?
Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
I mean, we aren't rid of these questions at all.
Yeah, and so I think it's so important to look, and I think you do something similar, but different, of course, because she's looking at two women from different classes, but you are looking at two different generations, and yet they face very often, you know, the same sort of struggles, right, over all those years. And it's not even two consecutive generations that you're exploring. It's a grandmother and a grandchild, you know, so I think it's interesting that we see similar patterns there as well, right?
So I'll just add to that there. In fact, the character of Manji, who undergoes, you know, the whole travail of partition. Now, what has happened in most partition literature is that nostalgia, as we're talking about, nostalgia is a very important strain. Also, sentimentality, you know, like this focus on emotion. But what I was trying to achieve was, you know, looking at a certain absurdity of it all. It appeared very absurd if you really think about it, because that generation was a generation that was very connected to land.
Yes.
their vocation, their profession, farming, these things are really rooted in a particular
You really bring
land.
that part beautifully into the book.
Thank
that
you.
Attachment to the
To
earth,
land,
yeah.
and that is where their whole identity is, and that is where they derive their identity from. So much so that if you have a person who's never ventured out of their village,
Yeah.
so where does that person really locate his or her identity? So it was there, and then when it is appended, how there is this complete refusal to believe that it is happening in a real way. So there is this absurdity which, if you noticed, it italicizes one passage where these women who are undertaking this trudge from the, that side to this side, it's a long
During
walk.
the riot and yeah.
So they kind of see the celebration of independence, and that whole passage, if you look at it, there is this whole strain of absurdity, and which is where those tramp-like characters who are folk characters called Mirasis, their dialogue comes in, because I felt that it is very Beckettian, or it is very absurd that somebody would just lose their homeland. So it's a betrayal of the highest order, and then how do they really deal with that? So more than sentimentality, which I saw was the dominant strain in earlier partition literature, here I tried to play with elements of absurd, because it goes also into the territory of what it does to her psyche, because Manji, to begin with, is a very strong character. If you see, she's the one who single-handedly gives her husband a cremation, therefore starting off from there. So she has all the strength to look after the pregnant daughter and
she
give.
Really rises to that.
She rises to that occasion. She rides the buggy, the horse, which she never
Which
done.
She has never done, exactly.
But when she comes to this side, because there is this hope that she's nursing somewhere. And Alka ji also pointed out to these patterns, that refugees constantly live through and they cannot break out of. Because like she was saying कि उनके लिए धरती उल्टी चलती है, क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं वो जो past के साथ एक attachment है या fixation है, या दूसरों के लिए वो nuisance value भी बन जाता है, like this character.
To her daughter.
So her psyche, what it does to her psyche, and what is her breaking point really, because, and especially through a woman's perspective, how partition is studied through this character.
I found that particularly interesting through a woman's perspective, because we didn't for a long time have the woman's perspective on partition, of course, and I think it took many years for those voices to come out.
Like I'll just
and
say,
those stories.
yeah,
and, there are always different stories from a woman's perspective.
Absolutely, yes.
And so there's so many things, like I think vividly the part that I remember from your description of that partition walk is a pregnant woman who's in her salwar, and she's urinating into the salwar, and that pain of that, and her thighs and all, that description it's so vivid and it's so painful. So those bits especially really got me, because it's a very unique struggle, right? And I think for many years those voices did not come out. And I also love that you've given the strength of absurdity to the women, right? That they do not see the heroics of it. These women find it so strange, and years later they still find it strange. And there was this one line that I saw this morning, in fact, it said that we don't want to be on this land, and those people sitting on our land, they probably don't want to be on that land. And everyone is thinking of their homes across the lands, and I thought it was a beautiful way of describing partition through her mind.
I'll just add here, if I may. This character of the great-grandmother is loosely modeled on my mother's grandmother, because I've never met her, but when we used to go summer vacation, there was a portrait of this woman who seemed very calm and composed. But this one detail about her, that whenever during the Indo-Chinese war, the aeroplanes would, suddenly come up, and this loud sounds would trigger something within her. So it was not per se the memory of the partition, but what these sounds did to her, and what memory that triggered, that would send her into some kind of a,
Yeah, I completely understand. My grandmother lived through World War II in Germany. She's German. and I mean, she's still, you know, even today when she hears aeroplanes, she's quite traumatized by it because she was a little girl during the bombings. So I can completely understand that. You know, we're talking about this intergenerational effect, and both your characters are missing a parent. And so that was a very interesting choice. You know, one is missing a father and one is missing a mother. And I thought, and the loss affects each of them differently. But you know, to not, as a woman in a conservative society, to not have a father, that was a very powerful thing I think you did with Jasmine's character. So what was that about? Like, did you plan it that way? Was it to give her that vulnerability, especially her mother, you know, the bitterness that her own mother feels, that sense of loss? There was no one anchoring the family, the marriage, you know, the marriage proposal. So tell me about that. I loved that part.
Yeah, so it was a very, I think it was one of the first choices I made for the book.
Oh,
it comes out right in the first paragraph that
It feels very strong, that choice, you know, so that was wondering, yeah.
yeah, so it comes out right in the first paragraph. And I think I wanted to make that choice, one, because of the kind of character I wanted to build for Jasmine's father as well. Even though he's never seen in the book really, but he's kind of present throughout
Yeah, you
the
feel
book.
it, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jasmine's father, even though he again is from like the more conservative district, but Jasmine's father is a very soft man. He's a very soft man, eccentric man. He, like, I think there's a sentence which says that Nina, her mother, kind of used to say that, you know, like, Jasmine, you kind of have to listen to the men, because when there's the need, they will protect you. And then Jasmine kind of goes on to think about how her father was an artist. He was eccentric. He was loving, kind, amazing, but he was not a savior, and he never intended to be a savior. He never intended to be like that strong man who wanted to just come out and be like, okay, I'm going to kind of take charge of everything. And I think because I wanted to build his character that way, and then see what the absence really does, because Jasmine becomes very attached to him because of who he is in her life, in a society that she is born in. He is kind of her anchor, you know. He makes her see the world. He makes her explore the world through his books, through his ideas, through all of that, and to take that away and then push her into a space which she was a part of, but she hadn't fully experienced because her father was always there with her. And to kind of do that and see how that influence still kind of lives through her in many ways, even though he still isn't present. And it was like, anyway, the book was never a dichotomy between genders, you know.
Yeah.
And here it was Jasmine's father who anchored her, not her mother.
Yeah.
So I think I wanted to show that. I wanted a character who would be expected to be extremely different from what he was, and what that absence does, and what such a character can really do in a story which is not about people like him, in that space, in the space that he is in.
And I think there's a bigger idea here, which of course is explored in your book as well, which is that a conservative society that is unequal to women also has no place for soft men, you know,
Absolutely.
or for gentlemen, you know. And,
I think it's a binary. It's a binary anyway, and gender roles are fixed.
Yeah.
So it affects men equally.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and you, sorry, go on.
No, like even in Layla's family, who is from a different background, her uncle doesn't really want to be a part of the power struggle that goes on within the city and like within the district, and he kind of has to be a part of it because of the legacy of the male legacy in the family. So
Yeah, or even her father.
Even her
He
father,
wants to
yeah.
actually at the start be much gentler,
Yes.
and their relationship as she grows older, sort of.
Yeah, he's forced into that role
exactly.
almost.
It's he doesn't feel comfortable in that, and even when he wants to reach out to her, he
Right.
doesn't. Yeah, and in your case as well, we have this beautiful man who loves embroidery.
Himmat,
you know,
yes.
and there's sort of no space for that in a way. So,
In both of Joginder's case as well as Himmat's case,
Yeah,
you see,
Himmat,
because in Punjab Fulkari is something that is a woman's thing, you know. It's such a feminine thing, feminine activity to do. But here the tables are turned because you have a soldier who's a World War II veteran. I mean, you don't expect such a character to be, you know,
Yeah.
doing embroidery and fulkari, but these are lessons that he's taken from the mother. And somewhere, so mother is not just a nurturer here, she's also a mentor and she's a teacher, and those are the lessons that he's picked from the mother. And it, you know, kind of breaks into this binaries that we have of men and women, that was, you know, an underlying idea with me, but then I knew a character like that. So reality is always, you know, stranger than fiction. I knew a character like that in my childhood, somewhere carried him in my head, didn't know him very well, but he used to be cycling around, got chatty with my dad, and he was a master embroiderer. And somewhere Joginder Singh is inspired by that character. And Himmat too, because Himmat's dad is this aristocrat who understands machismo and masculinity in a very, very limited, rigid way. And here is Himmat, who's given to, you know, show off emotion, and especially in the circumstances that he's in, and how he's never encouraged to do that. And what kind of repression that then he undergoes, and how that plays havoc, but then how he deals with that.
Yeah.
So in both of these characters, there's men actually who are, you know, coming out of the space where gender roles are fixed, and in Punjab you can see it very clearly.
Yeah, more than other places as well in Punjab. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you know, my mom asked me about your book, you know, because I was reading it while I was at home in Delhi, and I said, oh, you know, it's set in a fantasy world, and then I said, no, it's not a fantasy world, sorry, and then I didn't know how to describe it, and that got me thinking, because it feels a little like fantasy, of course, right? Or it's very imaginary, but then it feels so real. So how much of it is based on a sense of hope? Yeah.
I think that's probably the most interesting way I've been asked this question, because it is true. I think a lot of it has been based on hope. Like, so when I decided to not place it in a familiar space, I think one, of course, I wanted to push the boundaries of fiction and see, like, if I can place a story in a more ambiguous setting, which also which like you said is not really fantasy. You can see glimpses of it everywhere in your real life.
It's like a parallel world.
Yeah,
almost.
it's like a parallel world almost, but see where it goes. And yet it kind of allowed me to push, like, make the characters push those boundaries that they may not have been able to as well or as easily here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wanted to see how that can happen, you know, like, and for me personally also, this is something I realized much later. I didn't realize I was making this choice like subconsciously for this reason as well. But like, again, like places that I've been from, like, you know, like societies that the society that I come from as well. I kind of wanted an escape from that too, and wanted a place of possibility, you know.
Yeah.
So
Place of
yeah.
possibility, that's beautiful. Yeah, and the other thing which I really liked is, you know, most of your characters have, well, there's very interesting names, you know, there's some names that are entirely made up, you know, I've never heard those names before, and that's really lovely and adds to the fantastical element of the book. But you sort of made a conscious choice to give Muslim names, and you know, that was interesting for me, because I remember I was looking at reviews of your books, and one of them started with, no, this is not Pakistan, you know, this is, and I was quite taken aback by that, and then I realized why the journalist had maybe said that, and I said, oh, is it because the names are predominantly Muslim? But what I liked a lot, and I feel this while reading Black American writers as well, is that we're so used to the default being Hindu names in Indian books. And I loved that neither of your books has that, you know, they're two very different religions. And yours, of course, doesn't mention religion at all. But, you know, it's our default thinking. But it was a very nice choice again, because our default is to see Hindu names, or to see, like in Black American books, white people, you know. So
Yeah, and I specifically wanted, like, I agree, Leila and Jasmine are more Muslim names, In fact, my name's Mehak, and that's not necessarily always considered a Hindu
Yeah.
name either. But I mean, like, there are characters in the book who are called Jay,
Yeah.
who are called Raymond, who are called Thakur,
Yeah.
and I kind of wanted to really bring that in and put them all kind of on the same, like in the same tapestry, like
Yeah.
just kind of weave them all together, and a lot of people have actually asked me, like, how can this person's son be called this, like how can Raymond's son be called Jay, and like how can Leila marry Raymond, and and that sounds so strange when you just hear it like this, but when we actually
Says a lot about society, right?
Yeah.
That people are asking that
Yeah.
question.
yeah, but when we look
Especially
closely
fiction.
enough, yeah, exactly. But when we look closely enough, we actually see these variations all around us. There are
Yeah.
people with many different kinds of names who live on the same street,
Yeah.
and I think we often kind of go into our own silos and our own bubbles and kind of meet the same kind of people, and we kind of forget that so many of us really coexist and live
Yeah.
in the same space and are a part of the same fabric, really. So
And I loved, I obviously I've grown up in Delhi, so there's been great exposure to Sikh culture, but it was lovely to read a book set in that, to hear about a man taking his turban off, and that's not a visual we often get. So that was very nice.
Thank you.
well, yeah.
Thank you. May I add a little bit about names, since
Yeah.
we were talking about names. Now, my protagonist is Nanki, who actually, historically was Guru Nanak's sister.
Yeah.
And I've explained
and that is woven in as well, Guru Nanak's
Yeah.
story through the
I've
book.
explained that, and the reason why I wanted to name her Nanki was also because, like in the same spirit as we say that now the focus should shift from Shakespeare to Shakespeare's sister, because Nanki even historically was a very important character, in the sense that she was the first one to really recognize her brother for what he was. So she had that prescience or that sense or that good judgment to really know good from bad, or those are very
recognize
sharp
his
words.
greatness,
Yeah,
let's say.
those are very sharp words, but she had that sense of judgment. So really wanted to transfer that here. And the name that I had thought for the manuscript was really Nanki A Punjab Kissa. But the editorial choice and editorial suggestion was that I think of another name, because this could be construed as a book based on the historical Nanki's life, and then we rethought the name. But that was about name.
I loved Nanki. She has such quiet resilience. It's really nice. I think we have time for maybe one more question, I think, before we take audience questions. So one of the themes that I really, really wanted to discuss, and that I was interested in because of my book as well, is the idea of a woman's pleasure and a woman's physicality. And writing that is so complicated sometimes, and my book opens, in fact, with a very intimate scene between the two lovers. And I remember when we were doing excerpts from the book, there was an excerpt, I think, in Telegraph or something, and I can't tell you how many calls I got that morning saying, and it was just a natural excerpt because it was the prologue. So my editor said, "Chalo, we'll just put this, it's fine, let's send the opening page of the book." I woke up that morning to messages saying, "You have put a sex scene in the Telegraph. What is going on?" And I said, "It's not." But anyways, but the responses were so big. So I was wondering, because both of you deal with the idea of a woman's pleasure very beautifully, and the discovery of a woman's body. So I wanted to ask you guys about that. Either of you can go first.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so for me, I think the idea of a woman's body was like, especially because both the characters really go through situations which make them wonder and question and kind of not be as comfortable with their own bodies, because there are marks on them, there are memories on them, which
and those scenes are brutal.
and when it comes to pleasure, I think for them, like, especially there's a scene when Leila is getting intimate with Raf, and I think what it means for her is to, one, take ownership of herself again, take agency of her body again, despite what she has gone through, and say, no, this is still mine and I want to choose to do what I want with it. The scars are also mine, and I will deal with them, and like I will deal with them gently, and you know, like essentially for me it was agency for both of them. Like for Jasmine, where she comes from, to kind of date somebody, even to have that kind of a relationship with somebody without getting married, and have it of her own will, would have been unthought of, and she does, and I think for both of them to really take that step forward, for Leila to be like, okay, I want to do this, and make that decision in that moment. I think it was about agency, because I think women's pleasure, one, is not discussed often at all, and two, pleasure which they want to seek, which, I mean, not, the book doesn't talk that much about it, though at some point I'd like to write it in one of the books I do. But yeah, I think it was taking ownership of your own body and deciding, I want to do this, despite of what might have been given to me, but I want to take charge now.
So it felt very triumphant for both characters. It's really lovely.
So as far as Nanki was concerned, I think since at one level the book is a Bildungsroman, you know, it is her own journey and it is her own coming of age, and I feel that that dimension is something that is very, very crucial in this book. You know, her love interest and her interest in pleasure. So I feel just like you know, Mehak said, it is about ownership, it is about self-knowledge, and the way in which Nanki is exploring the surroundings and what she wants to be and the bigger questions of identity. I think somewhere it is also about exploring what she wants to be sexually, you know, what she's seeking.
And it's there's a stark contrast to, say, her first relationship.
Yes.
You know, when she's still in
She's
school
a teenager.
And, she's a teenager.
She's
and
a
that's
teenager.
puppy love. And, you know, and there's, you know, she's, you know, so there's those butterflies and yearning and all, but the fulfillment of that yearning only comes later.
Is much adult and much later. So yeah, I believe that as far as Nanki goes, it's part of the larger question, which is a question about self-knowledge, and I really place pleasure as one of the dimensions of that. Whether it is the scenes where you know, she's getting intimate with Himmat, or it is her own self-exploration.
I love that. It's a good note to end on, pleasure as agency and self-knowledge. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who has questions? You can ask either of our lovely authors. Or, yeah. Do we have a mic for? Yeah.
You know, when you said, I think both of you embarked on that point where you said that, you know, the lines between autobiographical and, you know, making it all about the character become blurred when you're writing a book. You know, it sort of like made me think about how when I was writing nonfiction, I was also trying to tug the strings which I wanted to pull out of those people. So when I was, so what I was wondering was, you know, when you're writing fiction, what is sort of the research process? You know, when you're exploring the plots, when you're exploring the settings, are you also going through those lanes, those homes, or is it just drawing out of memory? What is the research process like, especially when the book is set up in a fantasy world, or it is set up in a time in history which you've not lived through? So is it just from memories and from conversations, or there's more to it for both your works?
So I'll go first. Thank you for your question. It's an important question. So you see, the thing is, your personal perspective really matters, and I think that is the thread that really joins whether you're writing non-fiction or fiction. You know, your perspective really matters. As far as research, what research really goes in when you're writing fiction, especially delineating a historical space, I think where it kickstarts is your personal response to things, and that really eggs you on. Then the demands of every narrative are different. It just isn't tailor-made, or there are no tailor-made answers. But definitely, to know a subject better, to know it in the accuracy in which, it would do justice to historical fiction especially, then definitely one needs to go to certain other sources. But where imagination comes in and your, factual knowledge comes in, then again there is a kind of mix, because the same facts would be interpreted very differently by different authors. So that is the thing about fiction that is also charming, because each one of us have their own take on things and way of looking at it. So yes, it's an alchemy really, I would say, because facts and imagination, I think imagination is very, very crucial when we talk about fiction, which is what, loosely we call literary imagination.
Yeah.
And this question whether X is based on your life or Y is based on your life, I think becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the realm of literary fiction, your imagination becomes very powerful.
Yeah, so
Otherwise, it'll be documentary.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I just want to say, Rushdie has just come out with a book of essays, and though his recent fiction has been quite appalling, this book of essays is absolutely fantastic, and it's collected essays from the last few years. And he makes a great case for fiction in many of those essays, and I would urge everyone to read it, because he says that there's this recent fascination with write what you know. And young authors are told this a lot, write what you know. And he says, why should we write what we know? He says, magic doesn't come from there. He says, write what you can make
Imagine.
up. That's where fiction comes from, and sure, exactly. And he says that, these barriers, he says that, and exactly, he said, if we're not all documenting something, and I really sort of, it really stayed with me. And I said, absolutely, why are we so concerned about something being right or wrong? These are made up stories in the first place. Let's explore human emotion through them. I think there's something very profound in that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, you.
No, please. That was. I think I definitely want to read that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
excellent. It's lovely
And-
collection. Yeah.
And I'd like to echo some of Sapoon's thoughts. Like when she said that, I think the first thing is your personal response
Yeah.
to something and what it really makes you feel, rather than just facts. And for me, like while writing this particular book, I think it was a kind of energy that I wanted to put down on paper. Like it wasn't about anything specific, and which sometimes bothers me. I'm like, why is this not grounded in a place, And now when I'm looking to write, I'm like, no, I want to know about everything that I'm writing about. I want to literally, like you said, walk through veins. Because maybe that's the space I'm in right now. But the space that I was in when I was writing this book, when I was just out of college, and I was just full of like this anger as to why is this happening around me, and of memories of things that have happened, of memories of my mother really never having a choice. When she was younger, she knew she was going to get married, she knew she was going to be in the kitchen, and to kind of just put down that emotion and that energy on paper. So for me, this one was more from that perspective, not from very like from fact-based research. But yeah, I think there are different ways of writing fiction. I don't think there's a right way really to do that.
Yeah.
Even for the same author, like I said, like the way I'm writing now is probably very different, more research based. This was very different, and I think that's what's special about the different books you have. I mean, they give you that different perspective and different energy because they're written in very different ways.
Yeah, and I just want to say that similar to your work, which is non-fiction and where you explore people as well, I think you mainly have to be passionate about your characters,
Yeah.
and that's the same for
Yeah.
both, right? So sorry, should we wrap up? Are we wrapping up? Gosh.
I think we bring
was
this
very
session to a close. Thank you very, very much.
That was so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was an absorbing session. Wouldn't have expected any less from Sukoon and Mehak and Karuna steering the conversation with her own experience of writing being brought into every question. Thank you so much, and we will now take a short break before we move on to our next program, which is the book launch of Blaze. I believe everyone is in the audience, the people who are taking part later, but please feel welcome to help yourself to a cup of tea or coffee and make yourself comfortable. Thank you.